Now, we don't know for sure when or even if this third indictment against Donald Trump will happen. But if he is held accountable for attempting to overturn the 2020 election, it is solely due, definitely due, to the exhaustive work that started with the January 6th committee and its commitment to democracy. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from Mississippi and former chair of the January 6th committee, Benny Thompson. Congressman, good to see you. First off, what is your reaction to these additional charges against Donald Trump in this superseding indictment?
Well, it's consistent. First of all, I think you documented what had occurred after January 6th. We're talking about activities over a year after January 6th, where the president was still hiding information. He was also basically not telling the truth, either directly or indirectly through his attorney. And as you know, no one is above the law, not even a former president. Everyone at some point has to stand up for the rule of law, or as a nation, as a democracy, we will fail. So I'm convinced that the Department of Justice has absolutely the right authority, the right approach to what they're doing right now.
So, Congressman, as it relates to Jack Smith's January 6th investigation, have you been in contact with the Department of Justice or even the special counsel's office specifically since we last spoke? And if so, what was the nature of those conversations?
Well, I'm happy to say that, when we ended our work and transmitted all the documents that DOJ asked, they have not formally come back and asked for anything else. I think our investigation made the case. We interviewed people, as you've already indicated. Some people justice said they couldn't find. But I'll be honest with you, Simone, I think those hearings we held put significant pressure on the Department of Justice to come forward. I think up until that point of the hearings, it could have gone either way. But I think the compelling argument that we made as a committee before millions of Americans as to how close we came to losing our democracy, justice really didn't have a choice. And when the special prosecutor was put forward, I think we helped make his case. We were not, as a committee, a prosecutorial body. So actually, we had to move the documents over. But we had testimony, we had witnesses, we identified all the false electors who tried to make the case that Donald Trump was their candidate. All those things, people wouldn't have looked at it. And I think we actually helped the Department of Justice get to where they are now.
I would agree with you on that, sir. You noted you have not formally had any inquiries from the Department of Justice. What about informally?
Well, I have not been in Thompson personally, but there are lawyers who worked on our committee who I'll have to pay special tribute to them. They did one heck of a job. They worked night, days, weekend. They had no holidays. They did the work necessary to demonstrate how close we came to losing this democracy. But as important, Simone, no one has come forward to question the work of the committee. They tried to say, well, it was, a witch hunt. But you can't witch hunt with people you hired to work for you who came forth under oath and told the truth.
Well, let's talk about that, Congressman. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think you're making a good point. I mean, we all remember the hearings, but from what we know so far about the special counsel's investigation, it seems like he is focusing on the effort to overturn the election overall and not necessarily the attack on the Capitol. I think the committee made the wholesome case that the two are connected. So will you be satisfied if none of the charges that we see in this next indictment are connected to the insurrection itself?
Well, I am confident that if charges come next week or whenever by the special counsel, some of it will reflect directly on the work of the committee. We clearly identified Donald Trump as the main culprit in what went on. We didn't have the authority to pursue it. We made recommendations. But as you know, I actually sued the president right after January 6th, and I used the Ku Klux Klan statute that talked about how you could not impede government. I would not be surprised if some of that same statute is applied to this situation from the Department of Justice. We can't allow any individual or organization to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the greatest democracy in the world. If you lose, there are some alternatives available to you. You can ask for recounts, you can go to court, but under no circumstance do you cause an insurrection against that government. We're a better country than that.
Congressman Thompson, you talk about the Ku Klux Klan statute. We discussed that in December, specifically around some Republicans in the House, in Congress. Do you know if any of your Republican colleagues who supported Donald Trump's efforts are concerned about their names coming up?
Well, I would think, first of all, some of the same folk who are upset over our report are now trying to come back at some of us saying that we should honor subpoenas and other things that they didn't honor. Our job, we stand behind it. The 9 members of our committee did a wonderful job. And if the point, Simone, is we have had our report in the public venue for quite a while now. No one has taken that report to task as being anything other than truthful. We continue to offer that work of the committee before the public, and so we stand by it. I'm convinced that the special counsel, in reviewing all those hundreds of thousands of documents that we shared with them, in that document is proof positive that Donald Trump and a few of his clown car cohorts really created havoc on January 6th in this country. It was a conspiracy. It was something that we should never see happen again. And I'm convinced that at some point next week, at whatever point, and I'm actually feeling better since the letter has gone out to the president.
The target letter.
That's right. That's something will happen. I don't know what, but I'm convinced it will be directly related to the work of the January 6th committee.
My last question for you, Congressman, quickly, what is it like to see some of these same members who cowered in the Capitol on January 6th push to expunge Donald Trump's impeachments, and while also attempting to pursue a baseless impeachment inquiry against Joe Biden?
Well, it's indicative of what Speaker McCarthy had to do to become Speaker. And so now he's playing to the most extreme mega element of the Republican Party. So if they want to unimpeach a president who's been twice impeached, but it has no basis in law. It is just pablum for those mega Republicans who think that by doing this, they're doing something, but they're not. It's clear, based on the evidence, that Donald Trump committed errors and illegality pursuing the January 6th insurrection. And our committee's work, beyond a shadow of a doubt, shares that.
Congressman Benny Thompson, thank you. I really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.